Hi, I'm Elle. I'm a scientist who loves to cook, and this is Kitchen Protocols. Let's go over the ingredients. We have the acorn squash, which is the center and prized possession of the dish, sausage, onion, apple, garlic, celery, sage, thyme, red pepper. This is black pepper, and this is how I keep my salt. And panko crumb. So the acorn will be sliced in half and the middle scooped out, and then filled with the mixture made of the sausage, onion, apple, celery, garlic, sage, and thyme. The seasonings will go into the stuffing, and it'll be topped with the mixture of Parmesan cheese and the panko crumbs. Let's start by prepping the ingredients. The first step is to cut open the squash. I'll be cutting it through the stem and blossom end and opening it up that way. The acorn squash is in half. You can see the seeds and the pulp, and we don't want that. I'm going to scoop out all of those insides. See, most of it came out, but we still have a little bit of pulp in there. And that's not very tasty, and also the texture can get very weird. So if you're a texture-based eater, that might not be the texture you want. You can see this also rocks around. If you cut off just a little bit of the bottom, and I'm not great at guessing exactly how much to cut off, but it doesn't really rock so much. So there we are. So much cooking is guess and check work, especially as beginners. I know when I was young and I would watch people make these things, I was like, oh my goodness, how do they just know how to do all these things? Like, well, they didn't just know, they learned. They were taught by someone, or they learned by watching, or they learned by reading. And even people who are professionals, they still are learning new things, and they're still not perfect at everything. It's just how life goes. So these just go onto the pan, and the next stage would be to get some olive oil. I usually get whatever I can get on clearance, so I use the brush just to brush the olive oil around. So if you don't have a brush, or you don't want to dirty another utensil, you can drizzle and then use your hand to move the olive oil around, but this looks fancy. All right, to the onion, we're gonna cut off the stem top. I like to get these little roots out of the way. Ooh, it's dirtier than I thought it was gonna be. Uh-oh. After removing the stem and roots, I cut through the onion and took off the outer layer, which was particularly hard to get off on this onion. The next step is to make my slices. I go from stem to root and then across to get a dice. And then all these pieces will go into a bowl for when I'm making the stuffing. Next up, celery. The recipe called for 3 ribs, but I found that my celery was just a little smaller than usual. For this, I do a cut down the middle. Whenever I buy celery, I do buy it as the whole clump, but as soon as I get home, I cut it up into more manageable pieces like this, and they're already washed. So the celery and onion are the next thing to go in after the sausage, and they go in at the same time, so they're gonna go in the same bowl. There we are. Wonderful. Next up is the apple. So if you have one of those apple peeler, core, slicer devices, I do have one. I just don't use it very often.
Peeling one apple takes very little time at all. You can use a peeler like this or a small knife, but I prefer the peeler. From here, I like to cut the apple in half and then cut around the core. There were a lot more seeds in the apples I got this time, and they end up all over my cutting board. I also had to be careful of my dog, Tarragon. She kept nudging at me. She loves apples, and she would take this whole thing from me if I let her, so we ought not let her. The apples are for us. The next step is to cut the pieces into more bite-sized pieces. They should probably be smaller than this, but hey, it's a rustic dish and I'm not cutting it smaller. I don't have to, it's my kitchen.
The 4 cloves of garlic. Oh, that's fat. Okay, now fresh garlic is great. You can buy the minced prepared garlic. I think it's about a teaspoon or something per clove. I don't know. I think it's written on the side of the container. But if I have fresh garlic, I prefer to use that. I like the way it smells while I'm cooking it and the way it tastes. I don't like chopping it. So you can chop the garlic up or put it through a garlic press. Garlic press, depending on what kind you get, they can be difficult to clean. So you do want to get one that comes fully apart. For beginner cooks, crushing garlic may seem intimidating because you're using a sharp knife, clearly, but what I'm doing is putting it down and using just the heel away from the blade to give it a crush. I'm not moving my hand on the knife. It's very still, one crush. If you're too nervous to do that, you can crush it with a lot of different things. You can use the back of a spoon. You could just chop it up the way it is. You don't have to crush it first. I'll leave it like this. It's beautiful the way it is. I should be a Disney princess one day. So, I'm going to take a few sprigs of this sage. I love sage, and I especially love sage with sausage and apple. So, the recipe called for about a tablespoon. So, I like to sort of bundle up the leaves and give it a rough chop. This is thyme. It has a tender stem here, so that's pretty edible, and it's woodier down on this side. So this side you wouldn't want to eat. This side is okay. This just won't soften up as it cooks. Like even in a slow cooker, it doesn't really seem to soften. So I just pull the leaves off, and this little stem usually breaks off at the end. That's fine. I'm going to keep that.
From here, I just continued stripping thyme leaves off the stems. I don't really know how much I use. I just continue until something tells me to stop. After I've got enough leaves there, I'll take my knife and give it a smooth chop through just to get it all blended together and put it into the prep bowl and prepare for the next stage.
Next thing we have is the very last part, the prep. It's the Parmesan. Parmesan cheese, Parmesan cheese. That's my Parmesan. It's about 1/3 of a cup. And for whatever cheese you have, you want an equal amount of panko. There we go. I used plain panko for this, but you can use the Italian seasoned panko. It's good. Or if you have the plain panko, you can add a little Italian seasoning of your own. So there we have it. The 3 stages. The sausage will brown first and go back in this bowl. To the pan, we'll add our onions and celery, maybe a little bit more oil if needed. And then next, we'll dump in the apples, garlic, sage, and thyme. And once all of this is together as a mixture, that is our filling. So this has been waiting for the oven to heat up, which it has now. So it's going to bake for 30 minutes.
Now that the acorn squash is in the oven, we can start with the filling. The first step is to brown the sausage in the pan. The best part of this is getting the little caramelized bits at the bottom, and the fat will render out from the sausage to cook the vegetables later on. After removing the sausage, I'll add in the celery and onion and cook that for about 4 minutes until the onions are translucent and the celery is bright green.
Next step, we have the sage, the thyme, the garlic, and the apples. And we love it. We love it in our old yogurt container. Ta-da! Get that out there. At this point, we're also going to add our salt, pepper, and red pepper flakes.
Once the apples are soft, the sausage goes back into the pot to heat through. After mixing everything together, the stuffing will be ready to put into the acorn squash and go back into the oven. Once the stuffing mixture is complete, it can go into the prepared acorn halves and then be topped with the Parmesan and breadcrumb mixture and cooked until it's crispy on top, about 15 minutes. I really enjoy making this recipe and especially eating it. And if you want more detailed information, you can find my website in the description below. Thanks for watching today's video on stuffed acorn squash. Hope to see you again.